Hello, my name is Alex Payne. I'm the Commissioner here at the Department of Criminal Justice Training in Richmond, Kentucky, and I'd like to welcome you to your active shooter training for this year. The reason you're watching this video today is very simple. Fate favors the prepared, and today you begin your preparation, hopefully for something that will never occur in your facility. But if it does, then hopefully this will prepare you and all of your faculty members to respond properly, thus saving lives.
I was a graduate of Heath High School too, and I graduated in 1976 and started teaching in the middle school in 1981, and then graduated high school in 1985 and taught chemistry, and I was a football coach my whole career, and a baseball coach, coached some girls basketball also, and so a little bit involved in everything. Put in lots of hours at that school, and so whenever the shooting happened, I was 40 years old then in 1997, and being a male football coach teacher, I had parking lot duty just about all the time, and so I came in the side door that was about probably 60 yards from the lobby, and I heard the last shot that was shot, and all of the students were running out saying that somebody's shooting down there. So being a teacher, you go to wherever the trouble is, and so I ran down there and saw one of my students. I knew it was real whenever I saw one of my students that had a crease in his forehead, right there, and took him into our teacher office and just told him to stay there, and then went out. Saw another student that was on the ground that I thought I couldn't help, so went to another student, and that was laying face down on the ground, and then I just stayed with her until the ambulance got there, just trying to. I didn't know how bad that she was at all, because she was on her stomach, and so I just tried to talk to her, and anyway, so that student passed away, and it was like a war zone with kids laying all over the place, and that's my little war. I actually talked to a guy that was a Marine today, and said, that was our war zone. It's a little bit different for us because man, you get really close to your kids. I mean, that's, first of all, that's my school. That's my second home. I spend more awake hours there than anything else, but more than anything else, man, that's the kids that I love, and they're just like my own. And whenever you see them laying around, then and injured and dying, then it's just something that you don't really ever get over. But one of the things that I also think about lots is how calm the situation was there after we got all the students out of the way, and everybody was just kind of doing what they needed to do, and it really was total calm, and you really don't expect that in that kind of situation. You might think people would be hysterical, but all the teachers that were there in the lobby, and there weren't that many that were there because most of them had their students in their classroom. And with the 6 or 7 teachers that were there, they were, just kind of acting and doing what you need to do to try to help everybody out. So we went to school the next day.
You did?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
We did, and that was kind of the advice that was given to us from Pearl, I think, is that kids just need to get back and have some support from their friends, from their teachers, from the people that were there with them. Our kids, man, they were so strong too. It's just they had the prayer group that day, and there might have been 15 people in it before. From then on, it was there were 40 people that were in the prayer group, and being a coach, physical male kind of guy too. So I got switched from parking lot to the prayer group just because just to make the kids feel good, or feel safer, that there were several people that were watching all the time. just because of that copycat kind of thing that everybody thinks about. And so our kids they're just great. But I know lots of them still have issues with things. Not even the ones that were injured, but just the ones who had close friends that were there especially. I hope that all students have a connection somewhere with the teacher where they can come and talk to them, and I know that I don't have to tell teachers that they need to foster that, because that's just one of the things you do. That's the reason you teach, and I love chemistry, I love numbers, but I love my students more. If it was just the chemistry part, I would have done that. I would have made twice as much money and went to an industry somewhere. And so I was there because of my students, and so you just got to have that connection with them. So then maybe, and I know all students don't want that connection, but I think we all crave it. It is just a life-changing thing, and whenever you serve in Vietnam, you get to come home, and that's Heath High School is my home. So I have to go through that lobby and know that gunshot is right behind that picture frame right there, and just I'm an artist, I'm a visual person, so it's forever in my head. Just the scene that you have to take in.
When we look back on all these shootings and the unmitigated violence that's been perpetrated on the most innocent of our society, our kids, again, from elementary, middle school, and high school, all of them are at risk. The prevention, I think, is the biggest thing. But again, that takes having the right mindset and understanding this can and will happen again. Is it going to happen in my school? If it does, I'm going to be prepared. I'm going to identify these things from the outset. Most of these shooters, most of them, not all, but most of them were identified by teachers or co-workers well before these things ever happen. Prevention's where it's at. It's always been my philosophy that by the time those shell casings are hitting the hallway, or hitting the floor in the hallway, it's too late for prevention. And now you're reacting. And there again, it's a mindset. You got to have a plan. A lot of these active shooters, most of them, and when they look back, and this has been years ago, the FBI did a study of about, I think, 18 shooters. They were all white, they were all male. I think most of them come from middle-class families. Some of the more interesting things about their family situations were that most of them come from a home where these young, especially the young men, had either a poor relationship with the father or no relationship with the father. So that's some of the sociological aspects of it. But the teachers know and understand, they know these kids. I mean, and again, they can identify them from the outset. A lot of them are standoffish. Now, Marshall County, listen, that young man was an anomaly. There weren't a lot of things about him that stood out from what I understand, and in talking to the people that investigated that one. But in most of these cases, there were behaviors, that being a loner and not engaging with a lot of other kids, or something in a child's life that, some precipitating factor. Something's happened at home. The kid's an A++ student or even maybe a good C student, but all of a sudden becomes disengaged in what's going on around him or her. Messages, written or verbal, indicating violence. Those are things we've seen. They've shown the signs. And in a lot of the studies that have been done by the Secret Service and the FBI and others will tell you that, upwards of 90% of the time, we know who these mass murderers are. And we've seen it in the workplace and in schools. The other side of the equation, and to me the better side, is prevention. But that takes a lot of work on our part. We're going to have to talk about multidisciplinary teams, including the judicial system, CDWs here in Kentucky, mental health professionals, principals, juvenile court justice, judges, and the police getting involved to the extent that we can move in their lives and intervene in such a way that we can actually mitigate and stop these things before they ever happen. It's been done. The problem with that is it doesn't get reported. When a community is successful in identifying these type of people and they do mitigate and stop it, it never makes the news. But I'm here to tell you, I believe with all my heart. I can't prove it with any evidence because it's not out there. It's not put out for public consumption. But I believe that we're having some success, or we would be seeing this a whole lot more. So I would encourage teachers to have that mindset to identify these children before these things ever happen. And again, in the smallest things they do, the smallest acts of compassion, of recognition, of paying attention, of situational awareness, of understanding baseline behavior. You know, parents know their kids, teachers know their kids even better, and they know when something's amiss. But to say, hey, trust your instincts and follow up, I don't believe they have any idea the impact they can have in saving people's lives, maybe their own life, if they act on these things appropriately. It's not as natural as people think to kill another human being. There's some emotional and mental hurdles we have to get over. And what they were doing to train the military was, they would desensitize them. They would, make it to where the enemy was dehumanized in some way. And that started in Vietnam, and it goes a lot deeper than that. The thing that we have now is these first-person shooter games, and the violence that's depicted through Hollywood. Citizens, whether you want to accept it or not, we're most entertained by violence. We are. And it's coming across the airwaves every day. And in our children, I mean, if you're an older adult and you have some frame of reference and you recognize and understand what's real and what's not, that's one thing. But we've got children raised in a digital world where they can escape to this whole different place where violence is rewarded. And the number of people you kill, or even in one particular game, rape, it's actually rewarded. They're completely desensitized to violence, and Colonel Grossman would tell you, hey, that's the perfect training tool to make killers in our society. Now let me temper that and say we got a lot of kids playing these games, and obviously not all of them, or even most of them, are engaging in such behavior. But the deal is, if you've got that kid that's at risk, if you will, that's been compromised emotionally through some trauma in his or her life, then it's the perfect recipe to make a mass murderer. All it does is complete the equation. They are desensitized, and in some cases, these shooters, I think in Heath High School, Michael Carneal, he had what the military would call a transition to fire. He was an avid first-person shooter game player. And he went out, he practiced one time with a weapon, and went in and was more accurate than most SWAT teams in terms of his ability to kill. The kids that do this don't just wake up one morning. You're talking about children that have been traumatized, desensitized, abused in many cases. There's a lack of surveillance, if you will, or mom and dad's not watching, or maybe mom and dad, or at least dad in a significant number of these homes is not present. Even worse, I have read the research where it says, a lot of these kids, to have a dad that they have, or a father that they have a bad relationship with, is worse than having no father at all. It creates this recipe, if you will, for these kids that are prepared to commit mass murder. So they do prepare themselves, and our society has made it very easy for them to do that. They can look at every kind of video there is. They have access to weapons. Whether they have to steal them or whether they're already in the home. Those are factors, but you've got that heart condition. We've got to look at the human beings that are doing this and what's causing it, and that's where the fix is. Identifying, mitigating, stepping in, intervening, putting some surveillance, if you will, not from a police perspective, but just having a conscientious, responsible adult that's checking, hey, what are you doing? Are you building bombs in the garage and you've gotten by with it? Columbine, nobody bothered to look in their rooms. I mean, they're building bombs, with propane tanks. Somebody missed something somewhere. And I think that's going to be the case in most of these instances. And we can step in and stop these things if we're thinking correctly, if our mindset's right, and if we're prepared to do that as a community. When we have these horrendous, despicable acts of violence that hit our most vulnerable part of our society, it has a ripple and cascading effect on everybody involved. And there's rumors and there's things that always abound in terms of follow-up shootings, and in terrorist incidents we talk about anniversaries and how they like to strike again during these anniversaries. that's something else our society has to deal with. And the Israeli society, in fact, they've had to deal with this for years. They've had terrorists come in, they murder their children on a regular basis. They murder their citizens on a regular basis. And one of the tactics that they've successfully implemented in their society is it's back to normal as quickly as possible. And that takes the wind out of their sails, because these shooters are terrorists, and these individuals seek notoriety. That's one of the biggest things. It doesn't take a genius to figure that out. In the Christchurch shootings, New Zealand, the guy filmed himself in the act of mass murder and put it on Facebook. I mean, he set a whole new precedent, for getting recognition. And thankfully, the media, I think they've quietened that down, and they're just talking about the victims. That's a huge factor in that. But one theory is to get things back to normal as quickly as possible. We can't let fear cripple us in terms of getting back to work and getting these kids back to school. Yes, we need counseling. We need to be sensitive to their needs, and this, to be trauma informed, if you will, to understand how to deal with these children. We're going to have to educate ourselves a whole lot more, and a whole lot more of us to intervene and help these kids with what they should never even be facing in the first place. The fact is, it's here. It's not going away anytime soon, if ever. We've got to deal with it. And we got to deal with it effectively by getting them back into these schools and get things going again. I'm not saying that we ignore viable threats where we have actionable intelligence, if we will. I mean, obviously, we need to act on these things to stop these threats or any further threats, but we can't let rumors keep us from getting back to school and getting back to business. When these children get to sit at home and there's nothing to keep them busy, and they don't have the interaction and the support of their peers and teachers and parents surrounding them, I don't think it takes a psychologist to say that's not a healthy thing. It doesn't create a healthy environment for them to grow and to get past some of the pain of this.
The security concerns within a school are complex, and they are comprehensive. Therefore, it takes a comprehensive approach to address them. And basically what you're looking at is combating two types of threats: internal threats and external threats. An internal threat usually comes from someone who is supposed to be in your facility. So you can imagine if you're at a school, of all the people that would encompass. That could be any member of the faculty, that could be any student, that could be things such as cafeteria workers, your janitorial superintendents, or whoever. You can imagine the people that come through any of our schools on that are supposed to be there on any given day. So if the threat comes from someone who is supposed to be there, that's what's considered an internal threat. And so there has to be preparation to deal with those things, along with what might come from an external threat. An external threat is sort of the opposite. It comes from somebody who does not belong, on the campus. It could take the form of a disgruntled parent, maybe who's come to snatch up a child. It could come from someone who is just simply trying to attack the school for some unknown reason. We've all seen these things, play throughout the media as far as external threats. And so those are the two things that we have to combat within our approach to overall school security. A comprehensive approach consists of physical security measures that are mostly going to be in place to protect from that external threat. You're going to have a mental health component, which will be primarily in place to protect from the internal threat, and the third part being the liaison, the SRO. That's the individual that can be that direct contact to law enforcement, but is there day to day within the school interacting with the school faculty, the school staff, and protecting that student body. And so with that approach, they're all having to work together to fight against both types of threats, because it's not like we have a magic 8-ball. We can't wake up in the morning and shake it and, hey, is anything bad going to happen today, and what form is it going to take? We don't have that. But we know through history, through our unfortunate history here in Kentucky, through our unfortunate history as a country, where these threats come from and how they take shape. And those are the two ways, from internal threats and from external threats. And so whatever your system is, it has to be addressing both. And a lot of the physical security measures are already in place, but there's been some language change. Instead of mays, there are shalls now, and things like that. Just as an example, controlling access to the main entrance of the school, that has to be done in 3 ways. It has to be done through audio. You have to be able to talk to that individual who is there at the main entrance to your school. You have to be able to see them through some type of video camera. And then that door needs to have an electronic lock. So that would be somewhat like a buzz-in, buzz-out system. This is nothing new. However, it's an outstanding deterrent, especially to that external threat that we spoke about earlier. If an individual literally has to come up and be identified on video, to actually talk to someone within the school and be asked questions like, why are you here? Did you have an appointment? Which is very important. And then to be able to look at them, from the outside and decide right then and there whether or not to allow that individual access to your school. I can give you a perfect example. One of my daughters, all my daughters, by the way, all 3 of them, went to Catholic schools there in Jefferson County. And I won't mention the school just for them, but I'll tell you exactly how they did a outstanding job with security, because even back then, you had to call, say she forgot her lunch money, and you got that call. You had to call the school, make an appointment when you were going to bring it to her. And then when you showed up, they would ask you, what are you here for? And you said, I'll be dropping this off to my daughter. You gave your daughter's name, and you're looking at the camera. They're talking to you and then they literally send someone down that's standing on the other side of the door when they buzz you in. They buzz you in, you're greeted by that individual, you are taken to that one spot, where you're supposed to go. You're not allowed to wander throughout the school, and you conduct the business that you made the appointment for, and they escort you back out. That's a very simple but outstanding way of giving that impression of security at any facility, much less a school. And so that's simple stuff, and it's effective stuff, because those two usually equate. Simple usually equals effective. Just like any other part of our lives, we want to encourage good habits and not get into bad habits. Well, especially when it comes to security and the protection of our kids, we want to get into good habits. And so if we can follow these protocols, and as you're doing it, and yeah, it could become just day-to-day or routine. That's kind of a bad word, we use in law enforcement a lot, something that you kind of want to stay out of. But if during that routine something sticks out, that's what you're looking for. What makes me think maybe something I'm looking at or information I'm getting while I'm going through this routine doesn't feel right? Well, that could very well be the trigger that may provide the information that may save some people.
Teachers, we're going into lockdown position. Please go ahead and do your lockdown procedures.
One of the requirements of the law now is that the classrooms be equipped with locking mechanisms where once the door is shut, the individuals, the students, the teacher on the inside can open the door and exit. However, someone from the outside trying to get in should find that door locked. And that can be a very important component, as we've seen in past instances of keeping people safe on the inside. In many instances across the country, many active shooter situations that have occurred in schools, that barrier a lot of times has been the difference between life and death. And so if it's locked already, that's just one less step in the reaction to this active shooter situation that the teacher, the students don't have to worry about. They can immediately get to the deep part of that room. They can barricade the door instead of, if they're going to lock it and then pushing stuff in front of it. They can get back there. They can pull the cover down if there's glass over it, and keep someone from looking in and see if somebody's from the inside. It just equates to time. And if anybody's going to take anything away from this video, please take this away. What we are doing is creating time, because you have to know help is on the way. The cavalry's coming, and we need to give them time to get there, time to engage that individual who is causing this type of destruction within the school. The cavalry's coming. And so all the time that we can create that they're not taking lives, but are worrying about getting through obstacles or trying to open doors or actually looking for somebody, to actually shoot, the cavalry's coming. And if we limit that, if we try to make more time, then we're going to come out on top. Chances are more lives will be saved, and it's the whole concept, create time. Create time so help can get there. It's literally that simple. If the door's open, it's not locked, then it means I can just physically just step on through, or even stand, in the doorway itself and actually scan the inside of the room. You've done nothing to deter violence within that space. And yeah, if you don't close and lock the door. If you come up on a great big door that's locked, that's a barrier. That is absolutely a barrier. And if they're going to spend time trying to defeat the barrier, great. That's good for those folks inside, because again, the cavalry's coming. And that just creates a good atmosphere, a lot better atmosphere in those dynamics for the people that are trying to survive that. And we've learned again from the history of these situations that if you look at this through the eyes of that individual perpetrating this crime, they are looking for targets. And so if you can hinder their ability to see, you've taken away that ability to find a target. It's literally that simple. If you're looking through a window and all of a sudden the blinds are shut or something is put in front of the window, you can no longer see out the window. And so when you've got these classroom doors with those long square, we all know what they look like, those little bitty glass windows. And if you picture yourself as that individual who is looking for targets, and I go up there and I'm looking in this school classroom, or I'm trying to locate targets, and I can't see, chances are I'm gonna go leave that and go find some other place. Again, here I am, I'm creating what? Time. And I'm making them waste it, and that's what we're buying. There's a couple of things that I'd probably like to point out while we're on this physical security measures. Backpacks. The history in the Commonwealth of Kentucky with backpacks is not good. Every school shooting we've had to this point, a student has brought a gun in a backpack within a school. So I can tell you right now, if you don't have something in place where you're at least addressing that issue, you need to be thinking about it. And there's some good examples out here in the Commonwealth of Kentucky that they can turn and look to. And that's what we hope to do with our program here at DOCJT, to find those schools that are doing good things, that are coming up with good ideas on their own. And I know they're out there, I've seen them. And we want to be able to share those all across the Commonwealth with other schools who are maybe looking, for ways to deal with these types of issues. Separations of buses that are actually coming in to drop students off, and vehicles, civilian vehicles that are actually moving through area, that's just a common sense physical security thing. If, you got to think, how is the shooter going to get there? Well, we haven't had one use anything but a vehicle, to get there. So knowing that, again, ahead of time, then we kind of cover an area where there's going to be a large amount of students gathered in the morning and then gathered when they leave, as far as in buses. That's a key area, where that occurs. So if we can divide the areas where those students are gathering, coming on or getting off the bus, from vehicles that may be approaching, that's just a simple safety precaution to keep those two things divided. This is really where guidance counselors, all school staff, not just the principal, the assistant principals, the school nurses, anyone within that school who spends the majority of their time in contact with the student body is paying attention, to these kids. And as a whole, they do an outstanding job each and every day. They really get to know them. They sort of establish a baseline of behavior for them. They spend that much time around them. And so they know, when a child has a bad day, they know when a child has maybe a good day. They notice things that are not normal most of the time, within these kids. So there is where that little trigger, of whatever it is, whether it's just acting out, or they just notice something in their behavior, they notice that they're maybe sad, or they notice, just something's not right, there's where that interface begins, right there, starting to find out what the problem is, why they're feeling that way, and then taking that information and putting it into context. And not only that, but being a conduit for these children because again, they know the kids really well, but then the kids know each other even better than that. And so it's important to have the type of environment where a child could go to numerous sources, adult sources within that school with information that they may feel that is threatening to them or threatening to others, combination of both. When something scares them, that they can go and find that adult that they trust, that maybe they have that relationship with, that they believe care, about them and about where they're at and their safety during the day, and share that information. Share that information. That is critical to overcoming the internal threat. It's critical. You have to have it, because without that type of atmosphere in place, you can't ever hope to defeat an internal threat. It's just that simple. Because what is the result of that is actually the gun coming out and bullets flying. It's too late then, because you have to remember, this is somebody that belonged in your facility. And so if we didn't find out ahead of time, if we don't have these things in place where we can get that information and put it into context and get it to the proper people, that is the only way we defeat that internal threat. So that's how important that is. That aspect of situational awareness, knowing their surroundings, knowing their kids, and intervening when they notice that there's something wrong. Each school should have a risk assessment unit within that school made up of faculty that actually spend the majority of their time with the student body. This is especially important when it comes to guidance counselors. I think guidance counselors, school nurses are extremely important in today's society. I found that out while traveling across the state with and learning about school safety within Kentucky and kind of where it stands. I believe the statistic was from one guidance counselor that actually got up and spoke, and I don't remember the location. I do remember what she said. She spent approximately 20% of her time with the students and about 80% of the time on administrative duties, and we can't have that. That to me, in my mind, and in the mind of a lot of others, of course, now in the new law, it's required that needs to be reversed. It needs to be different. We have to get these folks that are trained, to talk to these kids, to interact with these kids and help these kids, get them back to doing just that. And so whatever your plan is, within your school, get those professionals that are trained to do that involved. And that's going to be a must. You're going to have that in order to promote school safety. And each entity will have its own role, and to be able to communicate is going to be vital. So keeping those things updated, the emergency plans especially, but even before that, just the general contacts, the day-to-day contacts about who would we reach out to if, and go through those things, in your mind. And if this happens, who do we reach out to? How do we reach out to them? Where is their contact information, and what can we expect from them? Work those things out ahead of time, because when something actually happens, it's too late. So, get those things in place. And I think most school systems do a very good job of doing that.
Our teachers are some of the best human beings humanity has to offer up. And that's universal. That's throughout the world. They're naturally nurturers. They love kids. They educate them. They give them the safest place to go most days. In many cases, they're the only parents a lot of these children know. And when you reflect back on our history, when you think about Columbine and Heath High School and Marjorie Stoneman Douglas and what's going on in terms of mass murder in our schools, we've put them in a situation where we've taken them and we're asking them to step into a new, more protective role. And their mindset has to be right to do that. And it's gonna have to be something that's very deliberate on their part in terms of doing what we do in terms of teaching our police officers to be very deliberate in the way they think about things. Just to take time to plan ahead and to think not if then thinking, but when then thinking. It's not a matter of if this violence comes back to our schools, it's just a matter of when. So the mindset has to be right, and it can be something as little as saying, hey, when this happens, I'm going to put all my kids in this corner of the room. I'm going to block that door and I'm going to barricade that door. Some of the things that our commissioner talked about earlier. And as simple as that sounds, just having that template written, you know, that little software package where they're ready to address these horrible instances of violence, that saves lives. And it doesn't take as much effort as one thinks. It just takes stepping out of that normal role that they're in. And really and truly, that's the best of nurturing, but it calls upon them to do things they've never had to think about before. And it's a very uncomfortable situation for them, and we have to realize that, but we got to move past that into doing our jobs of protecting the most innocent human beings that we have, our children. From elementary to middle school to high school, these predators, they don't care. They are apex predators walking into target-rich environments, and they kill. I mean, the violence is unmitigated. They kill without regard until something stops them. And the only positive things, these things are over very quickly, and if we can just get our teachers to the mindsets to do these things, to implement these security measures until those first responders can get there, we can at a minimum mitigate it on that end of it. And the other part of that equation is prevention, is to recognize, hey, who are these shooters? And a lot of times these teachers, they got a pretty good idea who this person's going to be from the outset, and that's a whole different conversation. I'll tell you how important mindset is, because it's so far removed from us as human beings. The thought of someone coming into the safest places that we've ever known, our schools, our places of work, and things like that, when they first hear the gunshots, they think it's firecrackers. But that goes to mindset. They think, well, you know, it never enters their mind that it could be somebody coming in to kill them. I think that's changing, but it has to change. And their mindset has to be such that they're prepared, no matter where they're at, to know, hey, if I'm here, if I'm in the teacher's lounge, you know, the places I spend the most time, that I know the entries and the exits, I know the rooms. It could be a janitor's closet. Hey, you know, if I'm here, man, that's the safest place to be. I'm going to get these kids in here. We're going to barricade that door and wait it out. Those minutes, those seconds are going to seem like hours. They're going to seem like hours. Ask any victim or anybody that's been involved in any level of violence. It really makes time slow down. But if we can convince them to do that, the commissioner's 100% right. That cavalry's coming. You know, in Marshall County, we had over 100 within, 15, 20 minutes. We had 100 responders there. They're going to come out from everywhere. In most of these cases, the shooting is over within seconds or minutes. You know, and the shooters, in many cases, they kill themselves or they flee and they're caught elsewhere. So that principle of waiting it out, barricading, but you've got to have the plan. The mindset has to be right, and the teachers have to be more deliberate. They have to think unlike they've ever had to think in their lives. But it's critical that they do that. They can save more lives than any police officer ever saved in a career by having a plan.
If you were to look at these situations from the perspective of basically having three phases, you're going to have a phase of preparation, which we've talked a lot about. But we all know, as well as we can prepare, sometimes bad things are still going to happen. So that moves us into the second phase. We literally have somebody within our facility or wherever we're at that is actively hunting and trying to kill people. And then you're going to have the third phase, which that's over, and now we have to deal with what's left. So let's move back and talk about that second phase. We talked a little bit about preparation. Let's talk about what if. You know, what if we're there and we hear shots being fired? What are our options? There's a popular system out there today, again, very simplistic. Run, hide, fight. And you kind of, that's easy to say, but you need to kind of delve into it a little bit. And so when you tell people to run, you know, that doesn't just mean in place. You know, you need to be able to know where you're running. And number one, when to run. Usually you'll run because you're very close to where the shots actually break out and you don't have the other options available to you. You're kind of caught in that in between. And so based on that, where do you run? And a lot of times within schools these days, those places are pre-planned. So know where you're going to run. What are you going to, where are you going to run? Are there people there that can't run? If you've got somebody, say, who's injured, who's on crutches, you have to have these folks trained to, well, we just can't leave that person there and hope for the best. Maybe you designate a couple other people to snatch them up and run with them. Persons with disabilities who may be in wheelchairs, you have to consider, those people, if they have to get mobile, they're going to need help. All that takes is a little bit of pre-planning. So you have to run with a designation in mind. And when it comes right down to it, and you're that close to where the shots are being fired, a moving target is a whole lot harder to hit than a stationary target. And once those shots occur and you're in close proximity, that's really all it comes down to. And Marshall was, again, it was horrible. You had a very, very large crowd of kids. And they did what the normal human reaction was when they are shot into, and that's run. And there's really not time there, to predetermine. They just know they needed to get out of that area. And that's one of the things that you'll see, that's common, that when those shots are being fired, people are going to scatter. You can look at the shooting that occurred in Vegas, for example, at that big concert venue. You have people running in all kinds of directions, but that you can anticipate, that. If you're planning, in your school, as far as an overall safety plan, you have really got to be aware where large crowds of kids gather. It's a shame that we live in a society today that's where people will hunt other people at, where they gather in large groups. And so if you have an area like that within your school, then that should really, really be scrutinized before you allow that to happen. If you're setting up a plan to where if it's just an emergency dispersion, where you're just everyone's scattering, that they have a number maybe designated, they can call and check in, once they feel safe, and secure. That's one option. They can call in from someplace. They can have designated safe zones, outside the actual school grounds, whether it's a nearby business that you actually pre-planned ahead of time, that, hey, if something happens and you need to run to a safe place, we've opened our doors, to this school, this facility to do just that. So there's all kinds of different things that you can do to have accountability after they run. With the hide option, I always like to use the term barricade, because if all you're doing is hiding, that's not enough. You just can't slip underneath a desk. You just can't go into a closet and try to be quiet and hope nobody opens the closet door or looks under the desk. If you're behind a door that can be locked and you've got furniture in that room, pile it up. Again, I go back to what we talked about earlier, create time. If that were you on the other side of that door, try to make it as difficult as you possibly can to get in. It's that simple. So when you think about hiding, pick places to hide that you can not only hide, but barricade with whatever's in there that's movable, that you can put in front of that door. And do not come out unless you're directed to do so by law enforcement. Fighting, and know this, if you choose to fight unarmed against someone who is armed, your chances are very, very slim that you're going to win that. I have seen and heard and read stories of incredible bravery where unarmed people take on people who are armed and in the act of shooting, hoping, and through their risk, hoping that they don't shoot as many people because of what they're about to do. It takes a special, unique individual during that point in time, instead of running away from the gunshots, to actually run to the individual who is shooting. And it's heroic, it's brave, but they know their chances of surviving something like that are slim. So that's why fighting is a last option. Again, I go back to our goal here is to create time. So let's go back to a situation where maybe we do choose to fight. We only fight because we have to in this situation. Say we've barricaded a door and for some reason, this threat has decided to try to attempt to breach that barricade. Well, get those makeshift weapons, pick up that fire extinguisher, grab a desk chair, grab whatever. And as they're trying to get through, if they do start to breach that, make them pay a price. You know, there's one time, you know, when you may have to fight. You're actually put in a position. You've tried your best. They're literally trying to breach something. But again, it's going to take the individual time, and you're trying to create more. There were hundreds of law enforcement officers on the scene within minutes at Marshall. And Marshall is a very rural area. And so if you can get that kind of response out in a rural area, you can imagine that it would only be better in an urban setting. But here in Kentucky, law enforcement here in Kentucky does an outstanding job. Here we don't run. We don't have these issues here. You know, and when they get there, they're going in. And they're going in knowing what they're supposed to do.
It may feel like just another day at the office. But occasionally, life feels more like an action movie than reality. The authorities are working hard to protect you and to protect our public spaces. But sometimes bad people do bad things. Their motivations are different. The warning signs may vary, but the devastating effects are the same. And unfortunately, you need to be prepared for the worst. If you were ever to find yourself in the middle of an active shooter event, your survival may depend on whether or not you have a plan. The plan doesn't have to be complicated. There are 3 things you could do that make a difference. Run, hide, fight. First and foremost, if you can get out, do. Always try and escape or evacuate, even when others insist on staying. Encourage others to leave with you, but don't let them slow you down with indecision. Remember what's important, you, not your stuff. Leave your belongings behind and try to find a way to get out safely. Trying to get yourself out of harm's way needs to be your #1 priority. Once you are out of the line of fire, try to prevent others from walking into the danger zone and call 911.
Yes, we're here to Washington.
If you can't get out safely, you need to find a place to hide. Act quickly and quietly. Try to secure your hiding place the best you can. Turn out lights, and if possible, remember to lock doors. Silence your ringer and vibration mode on your cell phone. And if you can't find a safe room or closet, try to conceal yourself behind large objects that may protect you. Do your best to remain quiet and calm. As a last resort, if your life is at risk, whether you are alone or working together as a group, fight. Act with aggression. Improvise weapons. Disarm him. and commit to taking the shooter down, no matter what. Try to be aware of your environment. Always have an exit plan. Know that in an incident like this, victims are generally chosen randomly. The event is unpredictable and may evolve quickly.
Left, slice and get my back.
The first responders on the scene are not there to evacuate or tend to the injured. They are well trained and are there to stop the shooter.
Shot down the hall. I got rear.
Your actions can make a difference for your safety and survival. Be aware and be prepared. And if you find yourself facing an active shooter, there are 3 key things you need to remember to survive. Run, hide, fight.
I've read some studies from psychologists and sociologists in terms of our children and their ability to communicate their feelings. Those things are going away. Technology is great, but it's a double-edged sword. And I think what we're seeing in our society is a lack of the ability to communicate better, to express their feelings in a way that's appropriate. And what happens is you're seeing them blow up, emotionally. And some of these kids that are at risk, they've been abused or traumatized in some way. And a lot of these kids, going back to the behavioral aspect, that's a common denominator in what's going on in their lives. And they don't have that role model in their life to teach them how to deal with these emotional troubles. And as long as we have that, we're going to have school violence, we're going to have workplace violence, and it's not going away. So it's recognition of that, acceptance of that, and getting the mindset right to be ready to the extent that you can to stop it or mitigate it.
I'd go back to what I said earlier and why everyone is watching this video right now. Fate favors the prepared. And what I mean by preparation is doing your due diligence to prepare yourself in the event that something like this happens. The good Lord knows we don't want this to ever happen again anywhere, much less in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. But if it does, you will rely upon what you have done to that point to get not only you through, but all the students in your facility through as well. And so you cannot take this lightly. And so each day that you come in, remind yourself, set something up. It doesn't matter to me what it is, but at least think about it once a day. Ask questions if you don't know. And I'll point out here, if you have substitute teachers, if you have people within your facility that come in midway through the school year, make sure that those individuals are up to speed on what your emergency plans are. Have them prepared, just like you prepare anybody else in the event one of these things happens, that they could also be relied upon to do a good job. It's a very difficult task. It's horrible that we have to think about and actually look at the things and talk about the things that we're talking about today. However, it's reality. And so each day that you come in, hope and pray that it doesn't happen, but be prepared if it does.